Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I am Chris Stirewalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right, in fact, with the American news media. And Eliana Johnson, do you know why I do this podcast?
Fill us in. Well,
there are many good reasons to do the podcast. I do really love our listeners, and I love meeting them and hearing from them and interacting with them. They're of all the people who, and I shouldn't say this, but of all the folks who consume the vast rivers of content that I produce, the Wretches are I enjoy them the most. That is for sure. And no, I don't say that to all of the content consumers. And I do it because it's a great opportunity to schedule time with a friend to see you and talk to you and do that stuff. But mostly I do it because I came to understand and believe that media criticism was necessary and important. I wrote a book about it. I did all that stuff. But I don't think that it should infect everything else that everybody does, because I don't like for the press to be the story. And this is a way to contain, to do it, but contain it. But I got to tell you, this week, this week, the news about the news is the news. Like, it's everywhere. We are neck deep in the news about the news.
Totally. So we're going to talk about the White House taking control of the White House press pool, and we'll get into what that is. We are also going to talk about the programming changes at MSNBC, the editorial page changes at the Washington Post, and the forthcoming book on Biden's decline from Jake Tapper. So just don't worry. We're going to get to it all.
Did you do a deep tease? Look at you. You deep teased. What? You're back to your TV producer days.
We're going to get to it all. So don't worry. But let's start top of our front page. The White House deciding to take control of the White House press pool. And that is the group of reporters, a handful from wire services, a handful of photographers, a handful from print outlets, and some from radio outlets.
Typically about 13 people.
That cover the president when space is limited, such as inside the Oval Office or on Air Force One, which means when he's traveling internationally, et cetera, et cetera. And so traditionally, the White House Correspondents Association, which is a journalistic organization that one must gain admittance to, has had a rotation of who is on presidential press pool duty today from each of these buckets. The wires, services, the print seat, the radio seat, etc. Now the White House is going to choose, and they will run the rotation. So my read of this, Chris, was that the White House did this to uphold their decision to boot the AP, because the White House booted the Associated Press on the grounds that the AP would not use the Gulf of America terminology preferred by the White House.
They wouldn't use it on first reference.
Exactly. They would say
the Gulf of Mexico, referred to by,
or as President Trump refers to it, the Gulf of America. And it is likely unconstitutional. It is now the subject of litigation to discriminate based on viewpoint. Who can have access to public grounds like the White House based on viewpoint. However, if the White House says, we're going to decide for the whole press who has access to space that we are providing, period. That's not viewpoint discrimination.
It's just, yeah.
So that's how I read this move. Meanwhile, the press is arguing that this is an assault on the First Amendment. And we should also note that a Trump-appointed judge has upheld the ban on the AP temporarily,
Yeah.
but basically told the administration that it's not on super solid ground, and Trump has seemed to concede that.
So I'm reminded of how Trump ended up with special counsel Robert Mueller up his nose, which is when he fired James Comey, he was asked by Lester Holt, did you fire him because he was investigating your connections to Russia? Yes. Now, if Donald Trump would have said, I fired James Comey because I didn't like him or whatever, then he can fire James Comey. We've established now that the president can fire FBI directors. But because he said that that was the reason, he ended up with the special counsel probe. This had a similar thing because they needed to taunt AP and say to AP, that's why you're out. Then, as you say, it's viewpoint discrimination. It's the most powerful part of the government discriminating on the basis of the use of free expression. So yes, I think that the decision to end the White House pool was started in that, and then I think it became appealing, right? Well, why do we let these people choose anyway? Why do we let these people choose anyway? Let's just blow it up and do it ourselves. I wrote a piece for the Dispatch about this and went into all the history of it. And the point of the pool, which starts in 1937, the point of the pool is and you've been a pooler.
I have been.
Is to evenly share the advantages and disadvantages of access in these more intimate settings. So everybody pays, right? If you're in the pool, you have to, it's sort of like NATO. You've got to be prepared to do your part, which is you got to staff the White House. You have to, those trips are really expensive, right? So there's the in-town pool and there's the travel pool, which are two separate entities. You can be in one and not the other. Again, it's over now, but you could have been in one, but not the other, because the travel pool, well, we're going to Singapore, right? We're going on a 14-day trip around the world. It's very expensive. So the idea being, we'll rotate through for access, and then we'll share evenly so that not everybody has to have somebody there 24 hours a day. Not everybody has to go on these trips. Started a long time ago. The White House Correspondents Association has administered the pool until Sunday of this week. And then the White House said, no, actually, we'll just pick. We'll just choose. And they dropped Reuters. Originally, Reuters was allowed to be in, then Reuters is out. Now, Glenn Beck's The Blaze, and I forget, Newsmax, and of course, the boys at Axios. The good people of Axios who stampeded over the carcass of the AP to talk about how proud they were to call it the Gulf of America, were immediately rewarded with this increased access. So the way I see it is individual outlets can go in or not go in when they're asked, right? This is not a pool. This is the White House is picking and choosing who gets access at any particular time. It doesn't have any, that's what it is, which of course they do all the time about who gets the sit down interview, who gets this thing, who gets that thing. You know, basically there's somebody from the administration on Fox 24 hours a day. They get to choose the outlets that they give special privileges to. Now it falls on the outlets themselves. Will they take that special access or will they not take that special access?
I also wanted to mention that there was a lot of blowhard talk from the White House Correspondents Association and members of the White House Correspondents Association when they really have not stuck up for equal access. To be a member of the White House Correspondents Association, one must have a full member, and to participate in the pool, one must have a Capitol Hill press badge. And in order to get a Capitol Hill press badge, there are arbitrary and capricious and unevenly applied requirements. So the Washington Free Beacon for 12 years has not been able to obtain a Capitol Hill press credential. And while now there's this outcry over the exclusion of the AP, nobody's raised a peep for years and years and years and years. So I just don't have any more faith in the denizens of the mainstream media to police these disputes, frankly, than I do the Trump White House.
Well, it's a club, and it started as a club. A guy by the name of, his nickname was Fatty. He was a reporter for the Washington Evening Star, and he was the first president of the Press Association, 1913, and they banded together because Woodrow Wilson was such a heinous, truly America's worst president, and such a heinous human being. And he decided that he didn't like having reporters who were critical of him attending press conferences. So they said they were going to get to pick and choose who was at the press conferences. So the reporters organized, and Fatty, what's his name, led the charge, and they put it together. And what they eventually succeeded in doing was presenting a united front. And to present a united front, they had to kick out scallywags, right? Because Wilson had a point, which was that there were people who were stock speculators and weirdos and creeps who were hanging around and making it a tumult. So they organized, they professionalized, and then they presented a united front to Wilson. And eventually they succeeded. Wilson quit. Their success was that they made Wilson stop doing press conferences. And then eventually when Warren Harding comes in, he starts doing them again on the regular, and they had demonstrated their power to flex. Trump is calling their bluff. He's saying, you got no power to flex. You'll all still come in here. You all want access to me. You all want the sweet, sweet content. And you're not gonna boycott nothing because you want to be here. And I suspect he's mostly right. I suspect that they're not going to present a united front, push back, and say no. As we're recording this, will the New York Times, the next time the New York Times is asked to come into the Oval Office, say no, because you have not honored the 90-year agreement between you and the White House Correspondents Association, we won't come in. I bet they go in because they want the access. And there's a legitimate argument to be made for doing it, which is if you just leave it to Axios and The Blaze and Newsmax, Trump won't get any tough questions and he'll get very favorable coverage. So, look, I'm not saying this is morally or ethically simple, but I am saying I think Trump has correctly calculated, he and Caroline Leavitt have correctly calculated that self-interest among individual outlets will prevent them from uniform action.
Beyond that, my prediction is, regardless of who's in the pool, he's still going to take questions from everybody.
Right. Well, Chopper Talk, they're not going to stop doing Chopper Talk, right? There's no way. That's his most successful product.
He's still going to take all the questions. So, he's very accessible. I don't think he's doing this because he doesn't want to take questions from these people. He's doing it as a show of power.
Right. And if they want to fight him, they have to take that away from him, right? They have to say, nope, we won't be going in. We won't be doing it. You can hang out with Axios and The Blaze, and we're going to the big networks, and we're going to stay out. We're not going to participate. And this is where they are. The Correspondents Association says they will no longer distribute the pool reports from the non-pool, and because they're not trustworthy. So as of this recording, the escalation continues. But and by the way, can I just say, I think his name was Fatty Price, was the reporter. Looking at Fatty Price, thinking about what he did and all that stuff. And then I looked at at Eugene Daniels, who is the perfect timing for the ongoing collapse of the Washington press corps, is that on the same week that the White House called the bluff of the Correspondents Association was the same week that Eugene Daniels, the president of the Correspondents Association, left Politico so that he could start his new weekend show on where? MSNBC. This is the Eugene Daniels who booked, and I forget what her name is. She's Amber Ruffin.
Yep.
And she is the Benny Johnson of the left. It's not funny. It's mean. She goes on Seth Meyers and talks about Donald Trump as a toddler, blah, 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 blah. Everybody laughs. It's the kind of hack, unfunny, allegedly transgressive, but actually very flattering to her own audience kind of unfunny comedy that many in that universe traffic in. So he's booked his NBC colleague to speak at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and it's a real resistance stuff. And the right thing, of course, for him to have done would have been to say, well, since I'm leaving Politico and I'm going to be an NBC weekend anchor, I'll give up this job and let a serious person do it. And instead, no, it's not like he's going to give up the attention, right? If you want attention, this is a great opportunity to have attention. It'd be real nice if they had, Jeff Mason or a serious person in the role at this time, but they do not. They have Eugene Daniels.
Well, I have to say he's basically been doing the job of an MSNBC host. Well, at Politico, he was considered the Harris campaign's go-to reporter throughout the campaign, and I think has hurt the Playbook franchise as a result of that. So not sure it makes that big of a difference, but it does formalize things.
But it would make a difference, wouldn't you agree, if they had a serious person who was respected across the board among legitimate Washington outlets, right? If you had a person who was like, oh, well, say what you will about X, they're a serious, fair, tough journalist. That is not what they have.
Sure. Okay, Chris. Trump, as MSNBC is debuting this new lineup, which we'll get to, is targeting Comcast CEO Brian Roberts. We have a report from The Hollywood Reporter. Trump targets Comcast CEO Brian Roberts as MSNBC plans new lineup. The president says NBC Universal owner, quote, should be forced to pay vast sums of money for unspecified reasons. In a post on his social platform that mentioned Comcast CEO Brian Roberts by name twice, Trump disparaged the company, claiming the corrupt operation is nothing more than an illegal arm of the Democratic Party. They should be forced to pay vast sums of money for the damage they've done to our country. And this is as NBC is looking to spin off MSNBC to its own company. What do you make of it?
So there's a good piece in Reason magazine by Jacob Sullum that alludes to this. Did you see, by the way, Ben Smith, Semaphore did a summit, a salon, and they had Brett Baer there. And by the way, Brett Baer and Chuck Todd smack talking each other was the spicy content out of that. But Ben Smith interviewed Brendan Carr, the chairman of the FCC, and very much to Ben Smith's credit, he said, "Aren't you doing," and what they're doing, and this Reason piece chronicles all of this stuff, "aren't you doing what you said was wrong for the Biden administration to do?" And he put it to him several times, several ways. And Brendan Carr basically acknowledged, yes, this is something that I thought was bad when the Biden administration did it, but we're going to do it now. And and I'll talk about this more later when we get, speaking of deep teases, when we get to my favorite item of the week. But this kind of, I'm threatening companies, I'm threatening publications, we're threatening people for saying things that we don't like, is bad. It is bad, period. It's bad when Democrats do it. It's bad when Republicans do it. The government should not police. It is not only bad, it is unconstitutional. It's wrong. And this stuff about Trump is going to, MSNBC better do what Trump likes. Do you remember when everybody was talking about the jawboning that took place during COVID and how first the Trump, but then in much bolder form, the Biden administration mau-maued social media platforms into taking down content that they thought was unhelpful in the pandemic. This was a huge cause celeb on the right. People talked about it all the time. Now, it's the jawboning administration, the FCC, Donald Trump. Everybody says, you better say what we like or we will hurt you. And in the case of the AP, we'll just hurt you in a real way. And from a standpoint of free speech, this is horse crap. And I don't know where this ends up. And I assume in the courts a lot, but certainly Brendan Carr's response to Ben Smith, I thought, encapsulated pretty well what we're talking about here, which is, yeah, we didn't like it when they did it, but we're going to do it now and do it even more.
Up next, we have the changes at MSNBC.
Joy Reid, who saw it coming?
Well, Joy Reid is out and Eugene Daniels is in. And one thing that has surprised me is that Al Sharpton is not out, as he has announced he's going to use his show to boycott companies that comply with the president's executive order to get rid of DEI. So that's interesting. But Joy Reid, who had a primetime show on MSNBC, will be leaving the network. And there are other smaller changes to the weekend lineup. One thing that was funny was some woman named Katie Fang, who had a weekend show, is also going. I had literally never heard of this person. So she's out. And Rachel Maddow used her show to rip the changes and call them racist. So she said on her show, and this is a New York Post story, MSNBC host Rachel Maddow rips OWN network for axing Joy Reid's show and other, quote, non-white hosts programs. It is also unnerving to see on a network where we've got two non-white hosts in primetime, both of our own non-white hosts in primetime are losing their shows, as is Katie Fang on the weekend, Maddow said. And that feels worse than bad no matter who replaces them. That feels indefensible, and I do not defend it. What she did not mention is that being elevated to primetime are Michael Steele, who's Black, Eugene Daniels coming to the weekend, who's also Black. But the show is a trio of Michael Steele, Alicia Menendez, and who's the third who's in that trio?
No idea.
I forget, but it's also a minority. So the minorities are being replaced by minorities out, are being replaced by minorities in. And then Maddow herself makes $25 million to do a once a week show.
I thought she got a pay cut.
Yeah, from 30 to 25.
Oh! Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
These changes are being made because the ratings weren't there, and it's a cost thing. So if she would like to contribute some of her salary.
You spread half that around. You could, who knows who you could hire. Yeah. Call me up. I guess I would be really part of the problem. I would be. I'm definitely not adding any diversity points. Appalachian American. I go with Appalachian American.
But the whole episode does underscore that we saw this with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski when they were booted off the air. Were they? I'm forgetting now. I'm blanking now. Why
after
they were
the Trump assassination?
Oh, right. Okay, and then they assailed network leadership, and now Maddow's doing it. One does have to wonder, given that these are the people who bring in the ratings and the money, if management, there's not much they can do about it.
Well,
this is the agreement they have.
First of all, we're recording remotely. What are you eating?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm pregnant.
You're
I
on.
just ate a-
It's not that
I'm
you
just-
can't eat. I just want to know because I'm food obsessed.
I'm sorry. And I just ate a protein bar.
That's it. Oh, I was hoping because you're in New York. I was hoping you were going to say
No,
like
and
a
I'm
magnificent bagel.
I'm done. I made
Should've
myself
been a
go
bit.
on a walk before this, and now I had to eat that.
No judgment, only food envy.
And I'm already like, oh, what's for lunch?
Welcome to my life. I live life as a pregnant woman. I walk through life thinking constantly about the next meal. My darling Jessica, who is cool about food, right? She's like, yeah, food, I love it. She likes to eat. She likes good food. She's all that stuff. But the look in her eye when I say, as we're finishing breakfast, like, so for dinner, I'm going to, and she's like, really? Is that where you are right now? Okay. So the biggest move at NBC, and by the way, given what you point out about Rachel Maddow and Morning Joe and all of that stuff, it's a big surprise that NBC wants to spin off MSNBC. Who could have figured that NBC would not want to keep this fun collegial bunch together?
Yeah, exactly.
But the big news at NBC is that Lester Holt is retiring from the anchor chair of what I assume is still the top-rated evening newscast. I don't know, but one of the big three. This follows after CBS. Norah O'Donnell stepped down, and now Lester Holt is stepping down. And I first wish to say, Lester Holt, I think, did a very good job. He came in when Brian Williams was crashing, no pun intended, the network's credibility because his false remembrance of what happened in Iraq came out, and they didn't know what to do, and they weren't sure where to go. And Lester Holt was a weekend anchor, and I think Lester Holt did a good, grown-up, sober-sided job of anchoring that newscast. And I think he did his network very well for 10 years. How do they fill that job, right? What does NBC do with that spot?
I think Lester was kind of a snooze, but
which is what I like about him. Yeah. I'm here for
that's just me.
I'm here for the snooze. Evening news snooze, yes.
It does seem like Tom Yamas is the guy who's in the waiting room.
Is that right? Is he good?
No, I'm being groomed for that. You know, he's fine. I just don't think it matters that much.
Well, it certainly doesn't matter.
Although there are still a lot of people who watch these broadcasts, you know?
Yeah, it's certainly not 1985, right? It doesn't matter like it did when there were 20 million people or whatever watching the evening news. But it matters because there is still a substantial audience, number one. But number two, it matters because that's the flag that you raise that other people are supposed to salute, right? So this is the biggest job in your news organization. So what you're saying to everybody else is, this is what we're trying to do here. And so who you pick for that job has a lot to do about the message you send, but also what they want to do, how they want to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know Tom Yamas, and I'm not familiar with his stuff, but I hope he can continue the calm, as you say, snooze approach to doing the news in a way that is not incendiary. Leave the sizzle for other things. Have a grown up in the anchor chair.
All right. Oh, up next. All right.
Amaze.
Jeff Bezos really taking the wheel at the Washington Post. He sent out a tweet in which he said, "I shared this note with the Washington Post team this morning. I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages. We're going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. There was a time when a newspaper, especially one that was a local monopoly, might have seen it as a service to bring to the reader's doorstep every morning a broad-based opinion section that sought to cover all views. Today, the internet does that job." Okay, so, Chris, what do you think?
How many times have I said on this very podcast, why doesn't Jeff Bezos have the newspaper he wants to have? It's going to lose money, probably. The New York Times makes money, but certainly in the short term, the Washington Post is not going to make money. So why not have the newspaper that you want to have? And how long ago did Bezos buy the Post?
10 years ago.
For 9 years, 8 years, Bezos didn't run it as a vanity project. He tried to keep the Washington Post, that it had been under the ownership of the Grahams with some changes, and they got shellacked, and then they moved to be rage revenue optimized. And then when the first wave of Trump clickbait passed through, they were back down at their heels. And then he's going to fix it, and he brings in Will Lewis, and the staff revolts. And then they say they're not doing presidential endorsements, and then they lose all these readers, and they do all this stuff. And after a decade, Bezos has gotten to the place where he should have started, which is, I'm one of the richest people in the world. I could lose $150, $200 million a year on the Washington Post and not feel it. And I'm going to have the newspaper I want. And the responses to this, to me, are hilarious. There are the people on the left who say, well, you're just doing it to suck up to Trump. You're just doing it to suck up to Trump. That's all this is. You're bending the knee to Trump so that you keep your contract safe. Well, let me tell you, we'll find out real quick, because I would say that individual liberty and free markets are not exactly the cornerstones of the MAGA agenda. I don't think that's what they're about. And if what he's describing sounds like a more libertarian view than the Wall Street Journal, which has an editorial page that is more conservative than libertarian, but with some substantial overlap between the two. And that's who Jeff Bezos is. He wants an editorial page that reflects that. If he does that, it will be in conflict with the administration frequently, right? If they do this, or the test now for Bezos is, will your editorial page tell the truth as its writers see it, even when that is in conflict with the administration? The Wall Street Journal does it. Will the Washington Post do it? And so that's the proof will be in the pudding on that. The other criticism, and I included the piece from is this Sohrab Ahmari at Unheard?
Oh, yes.
The idea that it's wrong, that this market-based idea, and that you would have a billionaire promulgating free market politics at a time when we know that free market policies don't work, and all of this stuff, and the billionaires are they're indoctrinating people to believe something that is bad for them, and blah 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 blah. Let me tell you, think whatever you want, vote however you want, your business, not mine. But the track record of centrally planned economies is, as my youngest man-child would say, buns. It's a real buns situation. The track record of socialism, of communism, of central planned economies, of hybrid economies, bad, right? It's not like they haven't been tried. And the idea that somehow, and this is something Tucker Carlson used to say, libertarians have been in charge in Washington for 40 years. No, no, I feel very certain that is not true. And the criticism that somehow Bezos is doing this to enrich himself or whatever else, I am open at least to the possibility that Jeff Bezos, noted weirdo, actually believes these things and believes that it works better. And so he can go put this in the public space and we can judge it. Like, chill out.
I think it's wonderful that we will have another newspaper in the country. Right now, there's one, the Wall Street Journal, that will champion individual and economic liberty, and that one of the wealthiest people in the world will do this public service. I think it's great that he's taking control of this. And the other thing he said that we haven't talked about was, somehow it must have gotten cut out of this tweet, was that America's the greatest country in the world. We are exceptional, and the opinion pages are going to reflect that. So one of the things, Chris, I mean, you basically got it. Many of the things that what I agree with what you said, but one of the other important things about this, aside from what you went over, Chris, is that the Post has pivoted from its democracy dies in darkness era, although it may not have formally dropped that motto.
Still technically there, yes.
Yeah, but so in doing that, I think it had been in search of an identity of what does this place stand for now, and Bezos just gave it one. He said these are the things this paper should stand for. So now we just have to see how well it actually does that. But I think that's also important because people seem to know what the Wall Street Journal stands for, what the New York Times stands for, but it's been less clear with the Washington Post.
My American Enterprise Institute colleague, Thomas Chatterton Williams, who we'll hear from later in the show as we keep our deep tease theme alive, pointed out the piece that the Post published 2 years ago, January 30th, 2023, by Len Downey, the former executive editor of the paper, that tried to give it a purpose, right? That tried to give the paper a purpose. That when he said that they would, as Wesley Lowery said, that they should move beyond objectivity, that the news pages of the Washington Post should move beyond objectivity. To take the Wall Street Journal example again, we know what the Wall Street Journal editorial page is about. It's about markets. It's a traditional conservative point of view, strong national defense and free markets. That's where they are. The news pages of the Wall Street Journal, no one has been better so far at covering in a very adversarial way the Trump administration, right? The Wall Street Journal's pieces on the wild self-dealing of the first family, of on and on and on. They're putting in the work over there. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be adversarial and tough in your news coverage, which is something separate and apart from your opinion work. What the Post tried to do before was say, actually, what's truth? And what we need to do is move beyond objectivity, and we need to do that stuff. Well, what did you think was going to happen, right? What did you think? Where did they think that experiment would end up? And what it's ended up with is Jeff Bezos coming in and saying, enough, 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 enough. And I don't know that he will succeed, but I hope he succeeds.
Chris, that brings us to our facile files. And up first, we have a piece from Good Morning America on how a community rallied for trans and non-binary recovery homes following LA fires.
Yeah, I feel very bad for the victims of the fires, but I must say that the old joke, the world ends, women, minorities hardest hit. This one really was the ABC. This is by Shafiq Nijab. Really proceeded unaware of those old tropes. Here's the lead. When devastating fires tore through Los Angeles in January, thousands lost nearly everything, leaving many displaced and uncertain about their future. Among the hardest hit were transgender and non-binary residents in transitional housing programs who lost more than just their belongings. Guys, everybody who lost something lost more than their belongings. Everybody whose home was destroyed and whose services were interrupted. So you could, and maybe ABC did this, you could go through and you could say, people in recovery from addiction, they were look at how this disrupted their lives. People with terminal illnesses, you could go through and say, basically, when the world around you turns into a hellscape inferno, all the problems that you have will be worse. It will all be worse when everything that you own is destroyed in a fire. And I hate to pick on it because I do feel very bad for these folks, and I'm sure it's harder, but it was a real a lack of self-reference was evident in the crafting of this piece.
Okay. You also flagged, Chris, this New York Times story, in the age of right-wing populism, why are Denmark's liberals winning?
So this didn't have to be facile, but so there's a facile part of it and there's a non-facile part of it. the non-facile part of it, which is a New York Times, I believe, magazine piece about how Denmark's restrictions on immigration have allowed the country's progressive, liberal social policies and welfare state to persist. And basically the message being to Americans, hey, if you want a welfare state, you can't have unrestricted immigration, guys. Like this, so it's definitely there's a part of it that's interesting, which is, and this is David Leonhardt writing and basically saying to New York Times readers, if you want a robust welfare state, you can't have unchecked immigration. And there's that. Now, the facile part is classic facile, which is, I don't know how many people live in Denmark. I wish that my eldest man-child who sent me this article was here, because I bet he could tell me right off the top of his head. Let me look. I'm looking. Denmark population. Okay, 5.947 million people. It's 5.947 million people, which is, a small medium U.S. state, right? That's not a big place, and it's full of Danes. It's loaded with Danes who, of course, have 1,000 years of Lutheran rule-following Scandinavianness. Are they Scandinavian but not Nordic, or are they Nordic but not Scandinavian? I can never remember.
You
but
are asking the wrong person.
You're from Minnesota.
Is all I can say.
I think it's Scandinavian, but the point being, the size of the population, the wealth of the population, the culture that is there, make things a lot easier to do than if you have to have something that works equally well in Miami, Florida, Clendenin, West Virginia, Elkhorn, Nevada, and Spokane, Washington, right? We're a big, weird, diverse, culturally disconnected society, and U.S. can't be Denmark. Just saying, just an eternal complaint about when people talk about such countries, which is they're small, they tend to be homogeneous, and you can do things differently there than you can in these United States. That's all.
Oh, Chris, sadly, we don't have a style section this week.
I mean, you're style enough.
Sadly, we do not have a style section this week. We are going straight to our obsessions. Those are the stories we can't get out of our heads. Chris, news came this week that we will have a book in May about Joe Biden's decline and how the White House hid it from the American people. Wow, what a great book. Now, the authors of this book are CNN's Jake Tapper and Axios' Alex Thompson, who actually was on this story more or less from the beginning. However, the audacity of Jake Tapper to author this book,
tell him the backstory. Tell him the backstory.
I cannot get over. I just want to play some clips of Jake Tapper on CNN over the past 4 years, asking questions of people who had the temerity to say a peep about Biden's mental decline. Let's play that.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
It's very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable.
You have I can't. This is so amazing. It's so amazing to me that
try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline. President Biden embraces his stutter, talking about it, while Trump mocks it, exaggerates it, belittles it. He's sharp physically. I mean, mentally. Yeah. I think the question is physically, right?
Right.
More so?
Right.
Right. And the guy who's his chief opponent is only 3 or 4 years younger than him.
Exactly.
I mean, you have questioned President Biden's age, mental fitness, ability to lead. Of those supporting Biden, you said, quote, shame on all of you pretending everything is okay. You're leading us and him into a disaster. Do you worry that you damaged him at all? False claims to the Wall Street Journal about President Biden's mental fitness and acuity. He's 81, and his memory, it doesn't seem great. It's not horrible, but I don't understand the outrage. Quote, behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping, unquote. The Wall Street Journal is owned by News Corp, which is run by the Murdochs. Beyond the headline, there is some critical nuance here. The article is mostly based on observations of Republicans, with former Speaker Kevin McCarthy the only one going on the record. They do note in the article that most of the criticism comes from Republicans. Have you heard any concerns from anyone who has met with President Biden about him seeming a little slower?
No.
The Russians are trying to make us and the public not trust our election integrity. Joe Biden has dementia, all this stuff.
One observation that I have is that this actually does, and perhaps I have a limited view of it because of being in DC, but it actually does seem to be sort of backfiring in that people seem really outraged about this. And I'm curious if you agree with that.
Well, tell him the backstory about Alex Thompson trying to get this book published.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure I find that quite as compelling as you do, but Alex Thompson was writing a book about Biden and his run for re-election, and that book contract was canceled a year ago. But that was before Biden dropped out of the race.
And the book got killed.
Yeah, the book was killed. So the contract was pulled. He decided not to write the book. My understanding is there were publishers, just not major publishing houses, who were willing to do this. But Simon & Schuster withdrew its contract.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the book was not about Biden's decline and the cover-up and all of that. It was about the Biden administration.
Well, what do you want to bet that was part? What do you want to bet that was part of it?
Well, that is how the story would have played out, right?
Right.
But they didn't know that at the time last February. So one has to imagine, of course, the appetite for books about this has increased because people are really curious about what happened. And there really has been no good report about how this was covered up inside the White House. What did Biden
Alex Thompson
do?
Alex
So
Thompson
he's been on this the whole time.
He's got a book. He's writing about Joe Biden. He's got a contract for a book about Joe Biden, and it's going to be critical. And I'm not trying to be all, conspiratorial here, but the book gets spiked and goes away. Then, and this is at the time, of course, when I don't know what the timeline here is, but for me, the Wall Street Journal story that was very mild in hindsight. Yeah. In May, Wall Street Journal comes out with a story like, that was, they're covering up, and it's worse than people think. And you and I joked at the time, if it's a cover up, it's not a very good one because everyone can see it.
Right.
It's not. This is the worst cover up ever because it's obvious to everyone. What it instead smacked of was bias, right? That left-leaning outlets did not want to tell their audiences, Joe Biden is not doing great. This guy it's not good. And they did not want to tell their audiences
there's another set of people actually governing the country who were not elected or confirmed by the Senate.
Right. The outrage over Elon Musk now should be there, but it also should have been applied to the Biden administration for Joe Biden's vacancy and incapacity. So you get the backlash, and I see the spiking of the Thompson book as part of that same circle the wagons.
Yep, that's fair.
Democrats don't want to. Who reads books? Who's going to read a book about Joe Biden? Especially if it's fair. Republicans aren't going to read a fair book about Joe Biden. Democrats are the only audience for that, and if it's fair, they don't want to read it either because it's gonna make them more nervous about the fact that Joe Biden is going to lose the election. So we go through this whole thing, and now it's time to clean up, right? This is the cleanup on aisle 6. And all the people who said bad things about the Wall Street Journal article, all the people who spiked Alex Thompson's book, all of that stuff now have to remediate, right? And there's a non-nefarious explanation, which is a publisher said, look, a book from you, Alex, will be better if it has a famous co-author. So, and by the way, news anchors and television anchors do it all the time. Bill O'Reilly, others, they co-author books. What they're doing is lending their celebrity to it to get the book wider reach and better promotion. happens. But in this case, it definitely looks like Jake Tapper says, I'm going to get on the right side of the issue.
I need to do a complete 180.
Tell me.
I need to get on the right side of this issue.
Yes,
and
exactly.
cover my tracks so that I don't look like a complete hack.
Yeah, it's cleanup time.
People are angry.
Did you see Corinne Jean-Pierre doing her? It was the firing squad.
I
was
saw.
a firing squad. They came for Joe Biden. I couldn't believe.
You don't have to lie for him anymore.
Well, I'm sure she believes it, right? I'm sure that she believes what Joe Biden believes. I'll take her at her word that she believes that Joe Biden it would have been better for Democrats to keep Joe Biden than throw him over for Kamala Harris, which is goofy. That is a preposterous assertion. What hasn't happened yet, and I wonder when it will, is for Democrats to, and it's hard because Joe Biden is so old and he's so feeble, but for Democrats to say, you know what, Joe Biden, why did you run? And I think Alex Thompson's book is part of that, right? Yep. For Democrats coming to terms with the selfishness of the astonishing selfishness of Joe Biden in 2022 saying, all right, here we go again, better than ever. It's hogwash.
Chris, what is your obsession?
I think I have America's obsession this week, which is the coverage of Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman's death. So most people know when you reach a certain age or a certain level of notoriety, major outlets will prepare an obituary for you, and it will sit in a file somewhere waiting for the day that you go on to your great reward. I don't know how long the New York Times had been. Gene Hackman was 95. I don't know how long the New York Times had a Gene Hackman obituary, but I'm going to guess at least 15 years, right? And there's a reporter and different reporters over the years, we need to write through, we need to update, right? When something happens and go through and update it so that when the person dies, we're ready to go. We've got the piece. And when Gene Hackman, and I think, I assume you're a fan of Gene Hackman's work. Just one of the best, right? One of the Mississippi Burning, Hoosiers, the French Connection, Royal Tenenbaums. The list goes on. He's good. Gene Hackman was just good in everything.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Not a movie I like, but
love it.
The too dark, too weird, but you have this huge body of work, and the New York Times was ready to go as soon as his death was announced. And the part of it, and I really felt so this is Robert Berkvist was the writer, and I don't know about Robert Berkvist. Sometimes these things even are published after the reporters leave the outlet. But it was tough because you had the piece, which was this appreciation of Gene Hackman's remarkable career. And Gene Hackman, by the way, is in my second favorite movie, Unforgiven. He has a great role in my second favorite movie. And you have this piece that is the canned appreciation, and then they have to insert into it for the second graph what they expected when they were writing it, that the second graph would say died peacefully in his home at the age of 95. Instead is like, Mr. Hackman and his wife were found dead Wednesday afternoon at a home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where they had been living. According to a statement from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department, the cause of death was unclear and under investigation. The sheriff's bodies found deputies of Mr. Hackman, his wife, Betsy Arakawa, and a dog, according to the statement, they said foul play was not suspected. And then the piece tries to get back to the obituary that it wanted to be, but the reader is left with, and a dog? What? It's so weird. The story is so weird. It's so fascinating.
And then you didn't even get to the wife's body being mummified, which what does that mean?
Well, I think both bodies had signs of mummification. It's very dry in New Mexico.
His said it looked like he suffered from a fall, and hers was mummified.
Oh,
the heck does that mean?
I thought they were both like desiccated because they had been unattended.
Well, I don't know.
Whatever. Two things that I will say. Number one, you don't want when you die in this life. You do not want TMZ trying to get your autopsy report. That's not a good sign for how things ended for you. So I hope for myself that there is no interest in my passing. Number two, it's just wild. It's just fascinating. I hate to be a celebrity journalism media kind of person and all this stuff, but I got to tell you, truly this meets the definition of obsession.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, where we field reader mail. And we have a note from Jill Wyman in Texas, and she writes, "Howdy, Eliana and Chris. Thank you, Chris, for calling out the man at the airport to his wife. Can I get blah, blah, blah? Yes, I 1000% agree with you. Where are people's manners? I hate it when people say that to wait staff, the bartender, ticket takers, etc. If we were just a bit more kind, the world would be a better place. Maybe try a may I please have, or maybe even
Preach.
could I try? Manners go a long way. I even try to be courteous to the ticket taker when exiting a garage, if they even have said individuals anymore. We are so into ourselves. Thanks for letting me vent, and I'm glad to know there are others out there who have similar thoughts. I saw you and your man children at the Virginia races sometime back.
Oh, nice.
But let y'all be. I was there with friends, enjoying the libations and company. I moved to Austin shortly after, and I can say it ain't much better here, but at least folks seem maybe a tiny bit more down to earth. I don't know. The Brits are awfully kind, so who knows? Maybe it's an American thing. Love your show. Keep on."
Oh, well, thank you. And of course, anybody should always feel free to say hi, but I appreciate when folks are deferential to the time that I have with my sons, who are rapidly getting to the point where I won't get to see them much at all. So I definitely appreciate that. And thank you. Amen. Which part of these United States is the most courteous? I find Appalachia and the rural South to be perhaps not as versed in politesse as every place, but are very kind and tend to be very, very decent to one another. And I think certainly in the Midwest that there is a ton of that in the Midwest. So I think there are places. Austin is tough because it's big, people are busy, and they're wealthy and all of that stuff. But as I spend more and more of my time in rural Virginia, I find that they're not as nice there as they are in West Virginia, but they're pretty nice.
Chris, that brings us to your favorite time of the week, where I am forced to say something nice. But please, go ahead.
Let me pay off my deep tease. Thomas Chatterton Williams with a great piece in The Atlantic, how the woke right replaced the woke left. And this, if you want one piece that sums up everything that I've been talking about today, and all of this, Thomas did just a wonderful job here. And I'll just read briefly. One of the defining features of the social justice orthodoxy that swept through American culture between roughly the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012 to Hamas's assault on Israel in 2023 was the policing of language. Many advocates became obsessed with enforcing synadical etiquette and banishing certain words. Wokeness, as it is known, introduced the asymmetrical capitalization of the letter B in black and not the W in white. It forced Romance languages like Spanish to submit to gender-neutral constructions such as Latinx. It called for the display of pronouns in email signatures and social media bios. It replaced a slew of traditional words and phrases. People were told to stop saying master bedroom, breastfeeding, manpower, and brown bag lunch, and start saying primary bedroom, chest feeding, workforce, and sack lunch. At the extreme, it designated certain words such as crazy beyond redemption. This was often a nuisance and sometimes a trap, causing the perpetual sense that one might inadvertently offend and consequently self-destruct. He lays it out, and he was on the front lines of that. He's a guy who signed the letter. He did all the stuff. He was on the front lines of that, and conservatives cheered him when he was doing that. And now he says, you're doing it. You're doing it. The people who were cheering Thomas Chatterton Williams when he was taking on the shibboleths of the left are now engaging in speech policing and all of that stuff. It's a great piece. It's very useful. Well done, Thomas.
Chris, my favorite item
This is
was
excellent.
admittedly kind of random,
You chose well.
but it's a Wall Street Journal piece titled "The Business Conference Where Dignity Goes to Die." Analysts and investors flock to annual consumer goods meeting with extra suitcases to load up on fruit ropes and Reese's peanut butter cups. Divide and conquer. And this is about a consumer goods, marketing conference put on by the Consumer Analyst Group of New York, where they give out tons and tons and tons of free samples. However, reading about the mad rush of grown men and women to snatch up free food, most of it's candy, but there's makeup and chips. And the fact that these people bring empty suitcases to this thing so they can bring home free, Oreos and Jolly Ranchers and, Pepto-Bismol is insane. And it just underscored to me the lengths to which people will go for free stuff.
They will take free stuff that they won't even eat themselves.
This was bananas. As somebody's quoted saying, "I worry a kid might catch an elbow to the face trying to grab a Twizzler." Okay? If you don't get a good spot, you're screwed. Families, so if the parent works for some company, they bring their wife and kid, that talk about dividing and conquering in different areas. It is bananas, and the pictures are amazing.
What a great piece! You won the favorite item contest.
It's bananas. That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story that you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. That's nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.